Hello, hello. Welcome back to those of you that have been here before. It has been a little while. Trying my best to stream whenever I can, but as those of you that have been here know, things have been pretty busy lately. So I wanted to go ahead and just mention that I'm going to be pairing today with someone. Brent, if you would like to go ahead and say hello and do a brief introduction.
Yeah. Uh, I'm. My name's Brent. I've been friends with David for quite a while. Um, been pretending to be a web developer for about 6 years, so 6 or 7. Um, right now, working with Ruby for the most part, Ruby on Rails. I'll do JavaScript when I have to. So David's probably going to be teaching me a lot of stuff today.
Hey, we're going to be learning together because I am also very new to Tailwind CSS, which is our topic for the day. Um, hello, Pika Tiff. Welcome in. Pika Tiff says, "Hi, Brent." I don't know if you have the chat log pulled up, but
I'll have to pull that up.
I'll have it pulled up, and I'll be keeping an eye on it. But yeah, I mean, just back to something that you already said. We're all pretending to be web developers. Like that's kind of what the job is, right? So I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that you've been pretending for 6 years because many of us have been pretending either less time or more time. We just learn how to get away with more and more, All right.
I'm working on getting this chat box open here.
Sure. I want to make sure. Pikatif says that audio is coming through great, so I think we're going to be solid on that. I appreciate that, and if you notice anything that sounds off, one of us is spiking or something like that, then, just let us know. Back to the topic of the stream for today. As you might already see in the title, we're going to be working on implementing Tailwind CSS. So Tailwind CSS is kind of a newer CSS framework. I won't say it's brand new because it has actually been around for a little while now. But it seems that very recently it's really become like pretty refined and pretty easy to use and learn. Currently, Octo, the hackable offline first markdown editor, the main project that you'll see me working on this stream, is written in, it's a Vue project, first of all. But as far as the front-end styling framework goes, we're using Bootstrap. And specifically, we're using Bootstrap 4. Some of you that are familiar with Bootstrap may know that Bootstrap 5 beta is out. And somewhat recently, I decided that I kind of have two options in terms of like what I'd like to do with Octo and styling management. And those options were to either continue down the Bootstrap path, which I've been using for years. Like Bootstrap is a fantastic framework once you learn it. It really is pretty well featured. And for the most part, it hasn't really served me wrong, like over the years. Like it's been pretty solid. But there have been some things missing. I use Bootstrap as a utility framework, which is kind of what Tailwind CSS is built for. And what that really means is that rather than overriding a lot of styles manually in CSS or in Sass, which is what Bootstrap is written in, I like to use the built-in utility classes and kind of compose them in my components. And so I sort of start building up components based on these basic utility classes like margins, paddings. There's a number of different like layout controls that Bootstrap has to offer. And because of that, I realized, maybe Tailwind makes more sense because it's a utility first framework. So it's really built to be composed and it doesn't really assign any default styling at all. Whereas Bootstrap is fairly minimal, it does still sort of prescribe its own style. It has a base style, which you then have to override if you prefer to sort of go with your own design or try to stray too far away from what they've prescribed already. Tailwind is interesting because when you start a Tailwind project, it literally removes every style from every element. Whether you're dealing with an H1 heading tag or a button, the text will look exactly the same. There is no padding, there is no margin. All the font sizes are identical, the font colors are identical. It's really quite interesting when you try to add Tailwind to a static like HTML page, because you'll notice that it doesn't just change the style, it removes all style. And that includes like the browser defaults. So it's one of the least prescriptive frameworks out there in terms of styling. But like going back, like the reason that Tailwind seems to be picking up speed is because it's very flexible, and you kind of it injects well with modern JavaScript frameworks. So I'm using Vue, for example. It works really well with Vue. And it even has a purge feature that allows you to specify like which styles. It's almost like tree shaking in JavaScript modules, where you have code that is not used, and your final bundle can just omit that code because it's not used. It just traverses kind of the call tree to find out whether or not you've called a specific style. And so similar to JavaScript tree shaking, Tailwind actually has the ability to generate a final CSS file that really only defines the styles that you actually used in your app. So it helps reduce bundle size a bit too. All in all, it just has a lot more modern features. Circling back to, my sort of dilemma with Bootstrap or Tailwind was Bootstrap 5 actually does make some breaking changes in the API in terms of utility classes. It's right to left compatible. So most Western tools are primarily just left to right because, English, for example, is a left to right language. So Bootstrap 5 introduces the concept of being able to flip from left to right to left with minimal effort, but it does mean that the actual class names themselves have all been changed. So anything that would refer to left has been renamed in Bootstrap 5 to be start, and anything that would refer to the right side of the page has been renamed to end. So instead of MR for margin right, it would be ME for margin end. And all of those breaking changes means I was going to have to go in and rewrite a lot of my components anyway if I wanted to upgrade to Bootstrap 5. And so I figured, now's the time. Let's just go ahead and implement Tailwind.
Do you think Tailwind will support that, reverse order? Well, reverse for us.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I don't know, because again, I'm fairly new to Tailwind myself, so I don't know exactly what Tailwind is going to support in terms of like left to right, right to left orientation. But I will say this, even without the framework itself, I imagine not exactly, and here's why. Like without the framework itself supporting it, that is kind of an opinionated prescription when it comes to CSS implementations. So the ability to say that your overall page flow goes from left to right or right to left is something that you can do with CSS tools without any need for like a prescriptive method. So with modern layout tooling such as Flexbox and CSS Grid, it actually becomes pretty easy for you to yourself design your site in a way where you could swap directions like pretty easily. So I doubt that Tailwind CSS, if they haven't already addressed it, I doubt that they will, because those tools exist. All Tailwind is trying to do is make those tools very accessible to you as a developer, the CSS tools that already exist, and improve your experience and improve the idea of composability of individual styles. So if they might have a util that just simplifies it a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if they decided not to mess around with it, because again, they're trying to offer us the tools to decide which implementation we'd like to use to do something such as swapping directional support for text. So I don't know, but it will be interesting as we read into the docs today, because I imagine we will have the docs pulled up a lot, as you can already see here on my screen. We've got a few Tailwind CSS tabs here because we're going to be implementing Tailwind in a brand new project. So that's something that I did do recently, actually, on a tiny little side project that I'm working on. That's not Octo, but that was a very low level of effort. So I'm going to be reading through the docs again, and we're going to be kind of taking this step by step.
Do we have to rip out some Bootstrap stuff, or have you already done that?
I have done nothing. So right now, we're going to be starting with Octo in its current stable production state. So the code base we're going to be working in is the exact live version of Octo right now. I have not ripped out any Bootstrap. I have not added Tailwind. So we'll be kind of going through that step by step. Now, will we be ripping out Bootstrap today? That is a good question, and I'm not sure. The reason I'm not sure is we're not going to deploy anything that's broken, right? Like, we want to make sure that by doing this change, which is a fairly significant change in an app this size, like, it's not a giant app by any means, but it's also not a tiny app. But we want to make sure that we don't regress anything. So it's going to involve a lot of probably trial and error and a lot of manual testing. What that means is I would love it if we could get all the way through ripping out Bootstrap, but the first step is going to be trying to progressively introduce Tailwind to see if we can introduce it and start using it on some specific components or specific pages in the app. And then assuming that goes well, we can start going down the avenue of pulling out Bootstrap.
So you think you might you'll run both Bootstrap and Tailwind for a while?
It's a possibility, yeah. I won't say that for sure, but I came into this knowing that it's a possibility that we might have both frameworks in it. So at least to start, we're going to implement Tailwind. And first of all, we need to see, okay, will the Tailwind reset completely distort our UI, right? Because I already mentioned before, Tailwind has a reset that is a little different than Bootstrap's normalized.css. So Bootstrap has a normalized CSS that kind of resets or erases a lot of default styles. But Tailwind's is a little more extreme. So the first thing we do, introducing Tailwind and including it in the build, it might break our UI immediately, in which case, maybe this idea of progressive enhancement is not actually feasible. Hard to say. Also, peek a tiff, if that text is not better, let me know. I did zoom in a bit. Hopefully that helps out. But thank you for calling that out. So to get things started, I opened up the installation pages. A couple of different installation pages because Tailwind has a few different guides depending on the framework you're using. As you can see here, actually, you see an integration guide. They actually have one for Vue 3 and Vite. Or sorry, not Vite. I'm so bad about that. Vite is how it's pronounced. Hey, Hannah. How's it going? Welcome in. So Vite is a new tool that is co-developed by Evan Yu, the author of Vue.js. And Vite is an interesting build tool that is incredibly fast, incredibly lightweight, and very minimal in implementation. So I started using this with a recent Vue 3 project, but we're not using Vite for Octo. Octo is built on the kind of initializer project template that Vue 2 came with, because Octo is still using Vue 2. I have not gone through the effort of upgrading yet. And so because of that, it's using the default sort of initializer template that the Vue CLI tool would generate when you generate a new Vue 2 project, and that came with Webpack. So I love this tool. I love Vite. Eventually, when I get upgraded to Vue 3, I might even migrate Octo to use it, but I'm not sure yet.
Okay, so Vite is like a replacement for Webpack.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
It is so unlike, it's kind of not exactly a replacement for Webpack, but it's a replacement for the most common use case of Webpack. So Webpack is a very high-powered tool. It is a bundling tool. It is a module resolving tool. Um, it is incredibly extensible. Vite is much more lightweight, and it uses some of the newer JavaScript and Node features for module resolution. And so Vite is not the same thing, but most people that use Webpack just use it for the basic bundling and module resolution. And that is what Vite can do as well. So very similar. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I thought Webpack was. I thought that's just what Webpack was. Is just for bundling, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's
So I'm one of those common developers.
yeah, and that's all I'm using it for too. So I mean, it's become a commonplace tool because it's very effective at what it does. So, so the interesting thing is I kind of started digging into this just a little bit, just a few minutes before we started the stream, because I was kind of curious, what does the Vite installation look like for Tailwind CSS? What does the Post Css plugin installation look like? So this is typically, right here it even says for most real-world projects, they recommend installing it as a Post Css plugin. And so I was kind of running through, I'm like, which of these installation methods makes the most sense? And funny enough, if you read through this here, you'll see that it has you install 3 tools, mostly because Tailwind CSS itself does not actually manage things like vendor prefixing. So, excuse me. So for those that are unfamiliar, vendor prefixing is the concept where you write a CSS style. So I'm trying to think. Transform, for example. So let's say you have a transform CSS property with a value of some sort. So maybe transform, and then the value is translate z 0. And so translate z is an interesting one. I'm not going to dive too deep into what you would use that for, but it allows you to assign depth to your web page. And so when you perform a translate on the transform CSS property, it allows you to move an element either forward in the page or backward in the page. It's along the z index, right? So when you're talking a flat window, which is what a web page is on, it's a flat window, right? You've got the y-axis, which is up and down, and then you've got the x-axis, which is left to right. Well, technically there's a z-axis, which is front to back. And using more modern CSS, you can translate on that z-axis. So again, I don't want to go too deep into that because that's kind of beside the point, but that transform property itself, originally when it came out, was not actually understood by all browsers as transform. And so you had to use, in some browsers, a vendor prefix, such as -moz -transform or -webkit -transform, right? So that vendor prefixing is something that you just as a developer had to remember to do. You had to remember that, okay, transform, the property itself, works in some browsers. Just tossing an example out there, like maybe it worked in Safari, or maybe it worked in Chrome, or maybe it worked in Opera by itself. But in Firefox, you had to use a prefix. Or in Internet Explorer, you had to use a prefix. Or in Edge, you had to use a prefix, right? So that's a lot to remember on top of just the CSS language itself. So now you don't just have the bare language, you've got all of these individual vendor implementations you have to remember. And so Auto Prefixer is a package that manages that for you. You write the actual CSS language syntax, and then it goes based on your target versions of those browsers, like how far back you'd like to support. It will go in and transform those into individual vendor prefixes for you automatically when you build your CSS file.
Oh, nice. And you just set those targets up in configuration files, I'm guessing.
Exactly. Yep. And then by default, it has a pretty reasonable target, so we're not going to change anything. We're just going to go with what it does by default. And then Post CSS. What is it? Post CSS is it's a preprocessor. I don't actually remember the details of how it stands out. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this up just because it might give us a a concise definition. Okay, so similar to how Sass or less or styleless style sheets have a custom syntax that looks a lot like CSS but is not exactly CSS, right? So the way that those work is the language you're writing in is not CSS itself. Like, even though it looks like CSS, that language is a pre-processed language. So it has to be run through a preprocessor that then gets compiled into the target language, which in this case is CSS, right? A browser doesn't understand Sass. A browser doesn't understand less. A browser understands CSS. That's the only styling language it currently recognizes. And so CSS preprocessors, originally, people started coming out with like these one-off implementations. So you had like, I can't remember which was first, but you had Sass, you had less, you had these custom proprietary, I mean, maybe they're like open source, but for this purpose, you had these proprietary implementations for a CSS-like language that had some extra features, had to be preprocessed. The idea behind Post Css is that it's a framework that allows you to build on top of and define your own syntax. So you could build Sass with Post Css, right? Or you could just build a couple of basic utilities in CSS as like Post Css plugins. So the idea behind Post Css is just extending the CSS language by defining your own custom preprocessors. That's really like the gist of it. And so that's what Tailwind does. Like, Tailwind itself is actually like primarily you're writing CSS, but it does actually utilize some specific syntaxes that are not technically like raw CSS, right? And so Tailwind itself does get compiled down into a CSS file, which you then import into your project. So that's why we need that tool as well, because so just to clarify, like Post CSS itself is kind of necessary for Tailwind. I think the reason that it's not a dependency of Tailwind directly. So normally when you install a package on NPM, right, it pulls all of its dependencies that it needs automatically, right? The reason that Post CSS is not a direct dependency of Tailwind is because there's a sort of hidden problem with NPM dependencies, especially when a dependency is common and it might already exist in your project. And that problem is that when you install a package which has a specific dependency on another package, if your project already has that package in your project and the thing that you're trying to install need conflicting versions, NPM has a really hard time with installing like cross dependencies like that. What it will end up doing often is it will try to install both. So it'll install both versions separately and run them separately. But when you're talking about using these plugins in a single build time, such as Webpack, for example, I want to run my Post CSS plugins for Tailwind, and I want to run my Post CSS plugins for my app. That's when you start running into a problem, because now you don't just have two separate packages. You're trying to import the same package, just separate versions, into one runtime. So instead, NPM offers this idea of defining what's called a peer dependency. A peer dependency is never installed when you install like a thing. So when you install an NPM package, if it has a peer dependency defined, it will not install that dependency. It does require it to run, but it expects that your project will install it, right? And so Post CSS itself is a peer dependency of Tailwind because of that sort of complication of it potentially already existing in your project. So for Tailwind to work, it does need Post CSS, but unfortunately, there's not a simple way at the moment, other than running this command where you install both things, to get Tailwind installed, right? Auto Prefixer itself, that's optional. We don't have to have that, but we're going to do it because it's incredibly useful. And we already covered, the reasons why. And then the capital D flag here is the same as saying --save -dev. So you install all of these things as dev dependencies in your project rather than as production dependencies, because all three of these are used to compile a CSS file, but there's nothing in these files that actually gets shipped with your app. So we're going to go ahead and run that after that long-winded explanation. So we're good. We do have an issue here. I want to make sure it's pulled into the project. I do use a Kanban board that I mostly follow.
Wait, did you already run that command in a terminal somewhere?
I haven't.
Oh, okay.
Yet. I want to get a branch cut first. So what I'm going to do is, though, just to make sure we're, following good practices here, I'm going to pull this Tailwind implementer up into the in progress column here. Boom. And then you can see here that this is issue number 100. So I typically name branches with a prefix of whatever the issue number is. That's a habit I picked up from the industry. And here we go. So can you see my terminal? I guess you can see it on the screen if you can't see it in VS Code, but I was curious, can you see it in VS Code?
Oh, let me check.
I just ran a git status.
I do see it.
Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, I have an alias for checkout called CO, just a really shorthand for it, -B, because we're going to cut a new branch, 100, the prefix, and it's going to be implement Tailwind. Boom. All right, so we've got that now. We're on our new branch. I have another alias. So I have an alias called getup. And so what getup does is it's essentially the same as calling git push -u or --set upstream origin head. And so what it does is it says, I want to push head, which is whatever my current branch name is, up to origin, and I want to track it. Right?
That's nice.
So
I might have to steal that because
yeah,
whenever I have changes to push, I just do git push, and then it's like, oh, you're not tracking a branch.
Yep, it always prompts you, and you can just copy the command. But
that's what I do.
Yep, it works. I did that for a long time, but then one day I was like, you know what? Let me spend 10 minutes to save myself 2 seconds.
I like that. Also, good job remembering that you're, using these aliases, because I was recently pairing and I just totally forgot. And I copied over this little instructions thing that I had, and it was just like full of aliases, and I'm like, oh man,
yeah.
I felt like such a dummy, but
hey, it's easy. It's easy to get used to them. It's easy to get used to your tools, and yeah, that's why I try to be diligent about remembering when I'm using an alias, when I'm not. I don't have very many. I only have like 5 or 6 or something, so it's a little easier. Like one that I really love is my gitl, which is an alias for gitlog, but it pretty prints it, as you can see here.
Nice.
So gitlog, actually I can just show you real fast for anyone else that's curious. Gitlog is kind of a verbose output, so you can look at it commit by commit, but very quickly this becomes kind of tedious to look at and reason about. So I have one that is much longer, that essentially does gitlog with a bunch of formatting commands to make it a little easier to read. And what I like about this command is it also accepts an optional parameter. So like gitl5 will just do 5 lines. So
that's nice. I like that a lot.
Yeah, super helpful. Especially since I'm the kind of person that does a ton of rebasing. So I like to be able to see just my last few commits so I can figure out which ones I'm going to squash together. Excellent. So we got our branch set up. So the next thing is to paste if I still have it copied. I do. Perfect. I don't know what that means, but we can ignore that. So we've got npm install -d, Tailwind CSS, Post Css, auto prefixer. Excellent. Before I actually run this, though, I'm going to go ahead and make sure we have Octo pulled up in the browser. So let's just make sure everything looks good, looks like it's working, and yes. All right. So here's where we're going to very quickly potentially see a change, right? So that's why I wanted to pull this up, because as soon as I install Tailwind, we might be running into some problems very quickly, but that's okay. Let's run that. It'll take a second. We also need to run an initializer. So Tailwind comes with a binary that you can run that allows it to generate your config files for you. And actually, instead of just talking about it, I think if we go back to the documentation, that would probably be one of the next things. Excuse me. Yeah, here we go. So it looks like maybe it doesn't generate the Post Css for us, but it does have an init that generates the Tailwind config for us. So we'll just follow this tutorial. I mean, this is a really solid installation guide. And it says we're going to have to manually create this file, which is fine. Oops, keep switching back to my regular terminal. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch back to the file directory here. And in the root of the project, we're going to go ahead. Oh, actually, I already have a Post Css config, which makes sense because, again, like I already mentioned, a lot of projects already do by default. So,
What's up with the 325 vulnerabilities and?
yeah, so that has to do with some of the dependencies I'm using. So I need to go through and run some audits and fix some. A lot of them, though, are in my dev dependencies. So it's really not a huge deal because they're not in the production bundle. But
Okay.
it's pretty common to have quite a few vulnerabilities. This is just me not doing my due diligence and going through and making sure all of my dependencies are fully up to date. So NPM will always warn you of vulnerabilities throughout your dependency tree, and that goes all the way down. So it's like it's not just your direct dependencies, it's your dependencies, and so on, right? So I'm also not entirely shocked because, as I mentioned before, I'm using Vue 2, right? I'm not using Vue 3 yet, so I'm using Vue 2. I'm using an older version of Bootstrap. I'm using some older packages that some of them are going to take a little bit of work to update. And who knows, some of them might just work by me running npm audit fix here, but that itself is going to be a separate effort, so I don't want to kind of conflate that with what we're working on with Tailwind. But yeah, I have to go through this every once in a while and just run through and like run this command and then manually go through and update some things, because very often there's like conflicts with my lock file. And so like the maximum version that some of the dependencies are locked to are not high enough to fix some of these vulnerabilities. And that just takes a lot of manually going through and figuring out, okay, for each of these dependencies, can I update the dependency itself? Will that solve the problem? And so on. Okay. So those are installed. What we're doing, we have our Post Css file already. Let's go ahead and see if I need to add anything there. Yes, I need to add Tailwind CSS, of course. So we'll go ahead and do that. So now our file looks identical, right? So we already had auto prefixer, which actually I just realized means I didn't need to install that, but that's okay. We already did. So now we want to generate our tailwind.config.js file by using this. So if you're unfamiliar, actually I'll just ask, are you familiar with the npx command?
No.
Okay, so npx is kind of interesting because any node or any npm package can define binaries that can run, right? So when you're looking, for example, if I'm in here and I open package.json, you'll see in my scripts, my scripts definitions here, you'll see that I can reference node itself, which is a binary that's installed on my system, or I can reference something like view CLI service. So view CLI service is not necessarily something that I have globally available on my system. Instead, view CLI service itself could be a dependency in my app, which, lo and behold, it is. View CLI service is a dependency. But inside the scripts definitions, you can reference binaries that are defined inside of dependencies. Now, the thing that's weird is like you can't always call them unless you have them globally available inside the root. I keep trying to switch. You can't always call them directly from your terminal. And that's because NPM does some special resolving of binaries by trying to find the given package for it by looking inside the node modules directory. So if we say ls-al./node modules, there's a .bin directory. And then in this .bin directory, as you can see here, there's a lot of packages that define different binaries. One of these packages you can see is view CLI service, right? So what npx allows you to do is it allows you a shorthand essentially for accessing these binaries. So if I want to access view CLI service from the node modules directory, I can either call it like this, right? So I can say I can call it ./node modules /.bin/view CLI service, or I can use the npx helper, npx view CLI service --help. Same thing, just a shorthand. So it allows you to use the npm file path resolver to run some sort of executable. So very similarly to that view CLI service, what we're doing in the docs here was we're going to run npx Tailwind CSS init. So it allows us to access that Tailwind CSS binary and then pass it the init command. And then this is what generates our tailwind.config.js file. New file right here, as you can see. And it looks identical to what we've got in here. Looks good. So we can move on to the next step, which is creating our actual CSS file that everything is going to be compiled down into. I mean, really, it's going to be compiled into a separate standalone file, but this will become our base file that we import wherever we want to apply these styles. Actually, that just made me realize I do think we could potentially import these styles progressively, but getting ahead of myself there. So, as you can see here, it says just in your own CSS folder, wherever you'd like to store that, create a file called whatever, styles.css, app.css, whatever you want to call it. And then you're going to be using these directives, these Tailwind directives. Again, this is a CSS file, but thanks to Post CSS, we can use these custom directives that were defined through the Tailwind Post CSS plugin. It allows us to integrate with Tailwind's utilities right off the bat. So I'm just going to copy these 3 lines because those are the only 3 lines we need actually. And we're going to create a new CSS file. This is going to be inside our source directory. In assets, I'm going to create a new file and I will just call it app.css. All right, paste our 3 lines and we are good to go. This is probably complaining because VS Code doesn't recognize this because it's not real CSS. Let's see. There might be a package for that. So we've got this Tailwind Css Intellisense. Oh, nice. That's pretty cool. offers us some really nice helpers for as we're writing it. That's going to be very useful for what we're doing. Yeah, let's see if that actually went ahead and solved our CSS problem. And no, it didn't. That's okay, though. I'm not going to get too hung up on these little swigglies because that's just VS Code trying to do its thing. So we should be good now to import this file. So the way that it actually knows to resolve and then build the CSS that we end up using in our final project is we have to import this CSS file. And by importing it in JavaScript, it goes in and tries to resolve that path. So it tries to resolve the path. It sees that the path it's resolving is a CSS file, and therefore it runs through the CSS preprocessors that are defined in our build pipeline, right? And so one of our Post CSS plugins is Tailwind CSS, and so it runs this CSS file through the Tailwind CSS plugin. So in order to do that, we can either import it in a given component, a single component, or we can import it at the top level of our project in main.js, right? This is like the top level. This is the entry point to a Vue app. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'll just go ahead and do that right somewhere. I guess it doesn't matter too much. So import @/assets/app.css. Boom. And so now we're importing that file. And when you import something directly and you don't do like an import from, instead of JavaScript, instead of Webpacker looking for a module in the path that you're resolving, it actually just evaluates the path in place. Now, again, it knows it's a CSS file, so it's not going to try to evaluate it as JavaScript. Unlike this file gets evaluated instantly as JavaScript. Instead, it runs it through the preprocessor and it generates the styles that are then included. So it knows how to handle different files. So if we switch back to the browser now, I have a feeling things are going to look different. Well, things certainly look different. Invalid Post CSS plugin found at plugins 0. That's interesting. So I don't recognize this error. Rather than sort of like hang around and trying to figure out what's going on exactly. Actually, you know what? One thing I like to try before I just start Googling this to figure out what the issue is, one thing I do like to try is restarting the dev server, because I've noticed that sometimes the Webpack dev server doesn't handle new dependencies well. Like, it does just fine when you're editing local files, but when you introduce a new dependency into the build pipeline, when it's already running, sometimes it just doesn't like that. So let me go ahead and just try restarting that. And then if it still fails, we'll go ahead and Google the problem.
Sounds like a good idea.
Okay, looks like I'm still getting the problem. So we'll go ahead and see what's up. Okay, so I wonder if this is actually related to something they call out in their... So Tailwind CSS actually calls this out in their docs, and I kind of skimmed over it, but... So see where it says it requires Post CSS 8, and if we're not using 8, we should see the compatibility build. I wonder if that is part of our issue. But before I just assume it is and install some random things, I'm going to take a look at our package.json and see if we can find out which version of Post CSS we're using. No, we're using 8, or at least that could have been added when I was doing that installation. But it looks like we're using 8, so that doesn't seem to be it necessarily. let's see. Let me specify this search a little bit better. Let me say view Tailwind. This is from a few months ago. Wonder. See, this is also something where, so if I run a git diff on my package.json, I'm like nearly positive we'll see that post CSS was just added by the command that I ran. Sure enough, it was. So what might be happening is, and this is one of those things where, again, Tailwind defining post CSS as a pure dependency requires that either you explicitly install it or one of your dependencies explicitly installs it. And so my guess as to what is happening here is that the Vue project that I have set up has an older version of post CSS running. It probably has 7 running, which is the one that they're saying is not compatible with the latest version of Tailwind, right? So if I'm trying to figure out how I would figure that out. So if I look inside node modules and look for post CSS, I imagine. See post CSS directly. Which that would be the one that I installed. I guess I should be looking under what would have it as a dependency. It's going to be kind of hard to find. I'm not just going to sit here and like dig through each of these, but my guess is that the Vue, however Vue has its build pipeline defined in here, it probably has post CSS defined as a dependency somewhere. So it's not under Vue itself, but it might be under, who knows, of any of these other like million packages that are in here. Actually,
Shouldn't it still be in the package.json though, even if it's
not if it's a dependency of a dependency, right? So like, right, when I install like my dependency, its dependencies get installed when this gets installed, but its dependencies don't get injected into my package.json because it's a like nested dependency.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that's the same thing with post CSS here. So the fact that I installed 8 doesn't matter. Actually, here's a good way to test it. If I say npm remove -d post CSS, let's see what happens here. So if I remove version 8, which I think this is going to do, what I imagine is going to happen is I think I can run npx post CSS and it'll automatically resolve down to that binary wherever it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and run a git diff on package.json again. Okay, post CSS is gone from here, which is what we want. Now the project is back to how it was. So npx post CSS version not found. Okay. Which just means that there's not a post CSS like binary somewhere available. It's still somewhere in here. I mean, there's already a post CSS file. It's definitely in there somewhere. I don't know the easiest way to figure out what version it is, but I'm going to go ahead and just make that assumption. I'm going to assume that we're running post CSS 7. And so what that means is I just need to change the Tailwind installation a little bit for this this document. So let's go ahead. I'm not going to remove auto prefixer. Actually, I am, because it's an explicit dependency. So I'll remove all the explicit ones that I set, and then we're going to run through this compatibility install. So let's do npm remove -d, Tailwind CSS, and auto prefixer. So remove those other 2 that we added. And then we'll run this line here. We can easily undo this as well, just like we are doing for the latest installs. While that's running, how to use Post CSS 8 with Vue 2.
Are you expecting there to be some incompatibilities?
I'm not expecting. So I'm curious. So right now the approach I'm taking is I'm using a compatibility build of Tailwind, right? I'm installing all these different versions of these packages to meet my project's current expectation of Post CSS 7. That's an assumption still. I haven't verified that. But I'm also curious, what would it take to take my current project and bring it up to Post CSS 8? And then I could just go through the normal install of Tailwind, right? So I'm kind of like on the fence there, I would prefer to do the approach of where I'm upgrading my current project rather than downgrading the new dependency. But I don't know what level of effort that would be at the moment. Vue does not support Post CSS 8 yet. Okay, well, yeah, that must be the issue then. That was back in November. Oh, we're good here. Okay. So let's go ahead and install these then. And then assuming the API itself is no different, I imagine it will just work now. Let me go ahead and look at these documentation a little bit more, because I could be wrong. Oh, it's identical. They just made it so that it works with Post CSS 7. Oh, nice. Okay. So later, if I actually get upgraded to Vue 3 and we have support for Post CSS 8, we can upgrade these dependencies again to their latest. What were you about to ask?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say it's almost like they knew you were gonna be curious about that.
Yeah.
API differences. Also sounds like you'll have to make a new milestone, huh? Upgrading to Vue 3.
It's already an issue. So.
Oh, just an issue.
Yeah, it's I have an issue for spiking it. So
okay.
It's not a milestone yet because I personally I'm not gonna look at like technical debt things as milestones. To me, a milestone is more about like the product itself. And really,
yeah.
Like as much as I hate tech debt, the product itself being on Vue 2 versus Vue 3 doesn't actually make a difference to the end user.
That's a good perspective.
So it looks
also
like that build
kind of
worked.
fits with what a milestone is.
Right.
Nice.
So the build worked. The app is running. We're pulling in Tailwind. So now we should actually be able to test out using one of these. Interestingly enough, everything looks fine. So the progressive introduction might actually work. Let's go ahead and test it out by trying to modify one of our Bootstrap classes to be a Tailwind class. I'm trying to think of what would be good to test that on. Let's go ahead and just test it on the spacing around the logo, actually. That should be pretty straightforward. So we're pulling it in already. I think Bootstrap itself is being pulled in on a CDN, actually. Oh, whoops, that's not right. How do I... There we go. I have my Atom shortcuts in my head, but not the rest. So yeah, so Bootstrap is being pulled in on a CDN. So it's not going to affect like the build process at all. Oh, I just realized I'm still pulling Moment in on a CDN as well. That could definitely be a package instead. But, again, other little issues I don't need to worry about right at the moment. So let's close that and see if I open up the sidebar. Whoops, keep hitting the wrong keyboard shortcut.
Oop. I got a little happy with the mouse button there.
excellent here. Okay, so these are Bootstrap classes, right? So the idea is that if I'm... actually, that's interesting. I guess my space... Oh, here it is. my3. Okay. So I don't know if that's the... I don't remember if that's the same in Tailwind or separate. But let's go ahead and take a look. So I should be able to close this and... I'll leave that for now. Let's just go ahead and take this one. I think we ran through the installation for the most part. Yep, don't need that. Okay, I'll leave that open. And for this one, I'll go to the documentation and we will search for margin. Right, so margin. MX and MY. So actually, it does have some very similar ones to the Bootstrap utilities. But something that Tailwind has that Bootstrap doesn't is something like this, like the M96. Like Bootstrap is very limited. It has like margin 0 through 5, I think. So 0 through 5, but Tailwind has a whole lot more available. So we'll throw something on there that'll be very obvious. Actually, let me do an MY. Maybe somewhere down here. I'll just say MY28. That should be pretty obvious. That's 7 REM. And I'll throw it on this logo class.
What is MY?
Margin on the y-axis. So it's margin top and margin bottom.
Okay.
So MY... What did I say? 28?
How's that gonna work? Like, which one's gonna pick up, the first MY or the second one?
Both. So specificity will be at play here. But what we can test is right here. We can just inspect it and see if both styles got applied. Oops. So I am seeing Tailwind styles right here. Actually, this is the wrong thing. But I am seeing a Tailwind asset there. So let's go to... Where is it? Here we are. Boom. So MY28 did get applied. See that? But it got overridden by Bootstrap style because Bootstrap heavily utilizes the important flag here. And Tailwind does not. So the important flag is automatically just going to override specificity. And it doesn't matter what I apply on Tailwind. If we have something in Bootstrap that's overriding it, that's going to win out. Which, in some ways, actually works in our favor to this idea of progressively implementing functionality. Because it means our Bootstrap styles are going to take precedence. And the only way we're going to get the true Tailwind styles is by removing the Bootstrap styles. Right? So that's actually not a terrible thing. Oh, hey, Rusty. How's it going? How are you doing? Welcome in. Hopefully I saw that in somewhat of a timely manner. I just happened to look over. But this is good. Now we know Tailwind is working. It's just, again, specifying a margin top with the exclamation point important here. The important flag is always going to override it. So if I just turn that off, boom. Now we've got one of our Tailwind styles. I guess the margin bottom is a separate one. So boom. So that's Tailwind applied.
Yeah, it looks better like that.
It's I mean, I don't mind a lot of white space. So, like, don't get me wrong, but my goal isn't necessarily just to make the logo the center of attention, as much as I like it. Rusty says, good, I've been lurking on my phone, walking the dogs, but I'm home now, very interested in Tailwind. I've heard very cool things. Yeah, I'm very new to it, so I am far from an expert, but I just started diving in recently. I absolutely loved it on the project that I decided to do a trial run with. And seriously, like in a day, I was convinced that I wanted to go ahead and migrate Octo over to use Tailwind. It's very nice. If you're a fan of composition and utility-based styling, it's fantastic. And one of the biggest reasons I'm actually doing it for Octo which Brent already knows about, is that it has a lot more emphasis around tooling for accessibility. And accessibility, specifically like visual accessibility and keyboard navigation, are things that I'd like to improve in Octo because they're pretty terrible right now. I'm not gonna lie. Like some things work, but not everything. And so migrating to Tailwind is going to make the accessibility improvements a lot easier, and a lot cleaner.
I think what intimidates me about Tailwind is with all the utility classes, it's like I feel like you have to be able to read the matrix to
So that's the thing. Like
to see what
if
styles are being applied.
that's true, but look at the way that I write with Bootstrap. I use
Yeah,
utility classes.
you use it the same way, right?
So, like, that's something I've been doing for a while now. And I definitely, like, there are some differences, though. So, like, excuse me. Bootstrap does have some, like, more complex utility classes. Not the one I just highlighted. That wasn't a good example. But it does have these components, such as, like, cards and, like, these actual, like, full components. And who knows? Tailwind might, too. I don't know, honestly. Again, I'm fairly new to Tailwind. But once you start going down this path of using utility classes, there's a pretty clear pattern. And like they do start to make a lot of sense. Like margin, for example, right? Like, if I tell you my is margin on the y-axis, top and bottom, then you could potentially assume that there's also an mx, right? So like there's a margin on the x-axis, which is left and right. Also, you can assume that if m is margin, then mt must be margin top, mb must be margin bottom, ml margin left, mr margin right, right? So it's like you learn how to do a specific like style, and then there's a whole like plethora of utilities for that style used in different ways that just make sense. Like it's fairly intuitive if you break it down to what it is and like what it means. So for example, deflex is how you do display flex in Bootstrap. The way that you do flex in Tailwind is just flex, right? Not deflex. Flex column is how you say you want the flex direction to be column in Bootstrap. Actually, you can see right here where I did that. In Tailwind, it just flex col, flex col, right? In both of them, if you want flex direction to be row, it's flex row. So it's like, these are all like flex utilities, right? If I want to do, as part of Flexbox, it helps to know CSS really well. So I guess like that's part of it too. Like if you know the CSS language super well, and you know how you typically would write CSS without having to hit the docs a lot, then I feel like you're able to pick up these utility-based frameworks like pretty well too. Because it's like, at that point, you just have to think to yourself, how would I write the CSS? And now drop the duplicate parts, right? So it's like display, flex, display, block. The duplicate part there is display. So instead of display flex and display block, it's either flex or block. And like it really just starts like it becoming a thing where you just like think about what would logically make sense, and it's probably that. It's probably that thing that you're thinking of. And if it's not, you look at the docs and you just like kind of reassure yourself the correct way. And after you do that a number of times, it starts to like stick with you. I mean, that's my approach, It's like if I don't remember how to do a thing, like the margin, for example, right? It's like just pop open those docs, look it up. I say, okay, my is margin on the y-axis. That makes sense. Now, 28, am I going to remember that 28 means 7 REM? No, probably not. Like, that doesn't, I mean, it kind of makes sense if you actually, so it does make sense. And I only know this because, like, I just recognize patterns like this, and I realize that every unit in Tailwind as a number is 0.25 REM, right? So M1 is 0.25 REM. M4 is 1 REM. M28 is 7 REM because 0.25 times 28 is 7.
Yeah, that's
right?
good to know. There's some.
So it's like there's definitely patterns. Like everything in it is really intuitive. And like again, like you're not going to know it out of the gate. Like, but if you actually like sit down and use it, what's the word? Oh, damn. There's a word for it I'm losing.
What, like often? I don't know.
Often, yes, but shit, it's like mindfully. There we go. Use it mindfully. Like actually, like
Yeah,
not
mindfully
not
often,
just
you know.
copy and paste it down onto the like into the editor, but actually like think about it and make sure you're taking the time to say, okay, I'm going to remember this. Idiomatic, yeah. I mean, idiomatic too, but mindfulness is the thing I was thinking of. Like when you actually stop and try to be fully like present in what you're doing, rather than allowing your brain to just keep racing ahead. Because like that's really easy. It's really easy to do. But like the way I learn best is when I try to like slow myself down, and allow myself to really like absorb like the idea behind something and not just like the MY28 looks good, right? Like that's the first step is like, does that look good? Okay, but why does it look good? Like you break it down and figure out like the pattern behind it. So.
All right. So we got Tailwind installed. It's working. What kind of impact are we gonna do here?
Yeah, good question. So we've got a number of things. Let's see. We've got a lot. Like we've got a lot to do, and so this is where it's gonna like come in, and we got to start figuring out like what we want to do. Oh, hang on. I also want to make sure I read this comment. So Rusty also said, you can also compose things so that you have reusable things that are a bit abstracted away from the terse. Yes. Okay, so that's actually a really good point, and we should call this out real fast before we actually dive in here, and that is, just like in Bootstrap, how you have utility classes for things like cards, right? So like a card is like this floating container object. Actually, a place I'm using cards is right here. Like each of these items is a Bootstrap card, right? The idea of a card is essentially just like a box that kind of like it sticks out from the background that contains content. And cards can have headers, they can have titles, they can have footers, or they can just have plain content like this, right? So in order to build in a card, if you broke that down into the individual components, you would have something like, you would have padding, you would have a background color, you would have maybe a margin, maybe a specific font style, font weight, something like that. So a card is a CSS component, and it is composed of a number of utilities. And so Tailwind makes it really easy to do that too. If you want to define your own utility or your own component, I'm pretty sure is what they call it. Components, here we go. Oh no, not the ones they're trying to sell me. Extracting components, here we go. So if you decide that you have all of these like random styles that make up something that logically makes sense to you, you can define a component style. And I'm trying to find a place of where they're doing this. Boom. Button blue. This is a CSS class that you're defining, and apply takes all of these Tailwind styles and stores it under this one new CSS class, right? So you can define a component now. Everywhere that I give the button blue class, any HTML element I give this class will automatically have all of these styles applied.
That's very nice.
Yeah, so
I like that a lot.
You can create your own components, which makes a lot more sense when you're trying to build like a consistent UI, right? So this is that composability piece that Rusty was mentioning, and also that I was mentioning. But you know, when I was talking about composability, I was talking about doing it at the element level, like where you actually like call each of these classes in line. And that's what I've done for a lot of Octo, as you can see here. But Tailwind makes it very simple to actually define those components, whereas in Bootstrap, it wouldn't have been quite as simple. So let's see, what time is it now? We're at about the hour mark. Actually, you know what? Let's take a quick break. I'm just like 2 or 3 minutes or something. I'm gonna do a quick pause here, stretch my legs, grab a drink, and then we'll come back and actually start like writing some stuff. And I think going the component approach is going to make a lot of sense. So I will catch you back here in just like, I'll be back in like 2 minutes. 1036, 1038. It's pretty close. Okay. You back yet, Brent?
I sure am.
Nice.
I got an apple.
Nice. Okay. I have some water. But I needed it because I don't know how to shut up. Let's see here. Let me figure out. So I don't know how much time you have, and I don't know how much time I have. But I doubt we'll get it like completely transition. I mean, there's a lot to do. But what we can do is we can tackle some of it. Based on how this is looking, I'm feeling pretty confident that we can actually leave Tailwind in with Bootstrap without too much of an overlap problem. I mean, most of these UIs look fine as far as I can tell. If I open this, let's see, actually. Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Do you have like a test server that you deploy this stuff to and use it for a little while before pushing it to production?
Not exactly. So I test things locally. It's a static like front end app. So I mean, the way it runs in my browser right now is identical to how it's going to run when I ship it. Because there is no backend. The only backend is Firebase for Octo.app. This is, which is slightly different from the open source version, only in enhanced features. But the actual app itself, the editor, talking aside from things like syncing and aside from things like logging in, which you can't even see here because this is the open source version, it's identical. So when I push changes up to the master branch of Octo, the open source repo, it does deploy to try.octo.app. So it's a subdomain. So I can push changes out and leave them there before I actually deploy them to octo.app. But I don't often use that for testing because, again, I can just test locally. I can also, when I go to develop, when I go to actually pull these changes into octo.app, because there are slight differences and some slight UI changes, I can run a production build of that locally as well. So, again, not something I do very often because it's not needed. But if I'm touching a piece of the code base that I know is going to potentially interfere with the changes that I have on my fork of this repo, then I'll go in and do some more testing over there. But yeah, I mean, this looks pretty good. Like all of the layout and everything looks good here. Nothing's changed. Nothing looks off. Excuse me. The UI here looks good. Let's test mobile. Oh, that might be caused by one of my shortcuts. Yeah, it looks pretty solid. So, I think we're good. Excellent. Let me go ahead and switch to the light theme just to test that as well. Yeah. Aside from some existing contrast issues, which I just need to adjust. I need to adjust some styles to handle like the contrast problem with syntax highlighting, but that's something that's already kind of in my my backlog. So yeah, I think we're pretty solid. Switching to the light theme. BRB switching to the light theme. Says Rusty. Nice. Yeah, I don't use it too often actually, because I'm just more of a dark theme person myself. But I do switch to it from time to time. Like if I'm in a bright environment and the other apps I'm using are light themed, then I'll swap it. But often I'm a dark theme sort of person. Oh, actually, there is a difference. I just realized it. Okay, so there's no space. So the headers are all reset. So remember how I mentioned that like H1 tags and like H1 tags and like paragraph tags, everything looks the same. Well, these are headers. And so you can see here, if I open try.octo.app, oops, side by side, make sure it's up to date, and go into settings, see the difference? Oh, and the container width is different. Interesting. So yeah, there are some differences. The nav is pretty much, the sidebar is like identical actually, which is pretty cool. Like it doesn't change at all. But there's some slight differences.
Well, that might be an interesting place to dig in, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we can do is we can let's see, where am I using headers? It might just be it's not just the settings page. The other issue is remembering like all of these different pages and where they are. So let's go ahead and do, let's start, I guess, with views. So the top level view, we only really have one view. You can think of a view, for the most part, views are like the pages that you go to, and then components are like pieces of the page. And so if you have like an entirely separate page, like on your app or multiple pages, then those would typically be different views. And these are all served by the view router. So view meaning like VIEW, and then view router meaning like VUE router. So
not confusing at all.
right. But view router, you can serve a page, or you can also serve a component. Like it doesn't actually matter. Like they're no different. They're all view components, but it's just an organizational thing. And so because Octo is essentially just the editor, without really many different pages, there's only the one page, which is like the dashboard, which is the main page here. This is the dashboards where you go to like create a new document. Even the settings page is not a separate page. And this is something that I might change at some point. I might make it so that each of these things are like different pages, which would probably make sense now. But when I was first building this, I was like, okay, but do all pages have the sidebar, right? Like, is that actually the full app navigation, or is that only the editor navigation? And I just kind of wasn't really sure. So, but yeah, okay, we've got some more headers here. We've got the header in the settings. So I guess we'll go through navigation order. So new document page, nothing to do, no problems. Context page, we've got this here. So let's go ahead and make sure that, actually, let me test this out too. Okay, those tags look good. They don't look like they have any issues, so we don't have to worry about those. We'll start with the header. So Tailwind has some styling classes for applying header-like styles to things. And it's through the text. Hang on. Text. There we go. Font size. See, the utility is called text, but it's under font size. But they've got text, and you've got text like 2XL, text 3XL, text 4XL, etc. Right? So we just need to find the ones that make sense based on like the heading size. And I'm thinking, yeah, those are freaking massive. 8 REM, we don't need that. So let's start with 2XL and just see what that looks like. So in VS Code here, I'm just going to close out of these files that we've got. And we're going, what the hell? We're going to open, what was that, context.view. And in here, you see you've got an H5 and an H6. And then, of course, like some of the things that I've applied to it are like card subtitle. This is another Bootstrap one. Card title. These are like Bootstrap styles that apply things like sizing and all of that. And we're going to be getting rid of those. So let's go ahead and replace card title with text 2XL and see what that looks like. And I'll leave this so we can reference it actually. So actually a bit smaller. I don't remember it being that small, actually. So I kind of like this size better. So we've got text 2XL. That looks pretty good. And then this text underneath is just, it looks like a paragraph to me. Like it doesn't even look like it's different from normal text. It's just the color that's different. So I don't know why that's a header. That doesn't need to be a header. So we're going to change that as well.
Do those two tabs have the same amount of zoom? Or is it just the size of the container?
The container size is different. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Which is fine. I don't mind that actually because I'm on a fairly large monitor. It's a 1440p monitor. And so the fact that my container is this small was kind of it was actually annoying and something I wanted to fix at some point, but it looks like Tailwind is already taking care of that for us. See, I've got wider containers now on my larger monitor. And I imagine that's also something that scales well. Yeah, see, it auto scales, no problem. So, okay, so that's good. We're gonna change this to a paragraph, which I just did. Gave us a little bit of spacing. We're going to get rid of card subtitle and text muted. Actually, oh yeah, because text muted is what's giving it that color right now. Font weight, all of that we don't need now. Maybe the MB3. And then text color is going to be another utility. So one of the really cool features, among many, of course, but another one of the really cool features of Tailwind that I like is the color utility. So things like text color and background color, Tailwind makes like a giant range of these things available to you. So if I search for text color, you can see that I have all these available. So I've got all these different shades of gray, right? I've got all these different shades of red, all these different shades of yellow, shades of green. And like all of these classes exist. And it's really awesome because actually it has them over here on the right. So you can see, right? On the right side here, you can see all these different colors of like yellow and green and etc. Blue, indigo. So it makes it like really nice and easy for you to like apply like theme styles just based on what they already have available. And then of course you can always specify your own colors if you want. For things like gray, it's super helpful because it's like, okay, if I want a lighter text, I can just say something like text gray 500, which is like a middle ground typically, the 500 value. First, let me see what our thing looks like here. So it's just normal white because we got rid of that Bootstrap style. And when I say text gray 500, well, first of all, that Intellisense plugin is showing me what the color is, but now we can see here, this is what the color looks like, right? And I don't know, maybe a little bit lighter since we're on a dark background. I can't find the 4 apparently. There we go. So just like a lighter shade right there. And yeah, that looks pretty good, honestly. Like now the spacing, I'll probably change a little bit, give it a little more spacing. And I'll just say like MB2. Boom. And then I'll change this to MB3 to be 4. This is where the Bootstrap style is going to be kind of annoying because it's going to like get in the way. But there we go. So we've got our title here, our paragraph. We've got a normal paragraph here, which is fine. That's what we want. We can kind of just start implementing each of these with Tailwind instead.
Would it be possible to turn off the Bootstrap for like just this page or?
Okay, so Bootstrap is I don't think so, and that's just because Bootstrap is being loaded over a CDN, and the way that Bootstrap is loaded, it's a basic CSS file. It's not like per component. So I'll show you what happens. Like I don't know. I imagine most of our styles are going to disappear because most of the styles are still Bootstrap. But let me go ahead. That's right. It's in index.html because it's loaded over the CDN. Yeah. Lots of weird things are happening. There we go. There's the page. The editor's in here somewhere. Oh, I'm on new documents now. Hang on, I have to go back to context. There we go. So as you can see, we're relying pretty heavily on the Bootstrap styles at the moment.
Oh yeah, I see.
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be an effort. So, when you say this was a huge area of improvement in the 2.0 release, Rusty, are you referring to the color styles that I was just talking about? Apologies if I missed that. But if so, then amazing feature because the color utilities are nuts. All right, so yes, okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm a big fan so far. I guess. Well, now you're making me wonder if we should start with the navigational aspects that show up on every page. Because if we converted those, then we probably could turn off Bootstrap and do the other pages individually. So, what do you think? I'd be fine with that.
I think it's, getting kind of close to my bedtime.
Yeah, I feel that. It's already 11, so. Yeah, I guess at this point then, like, to me, like, the main point here, and the main point even just to do this on stream, for example, is just to go through a lot of what we've already done, which is the initial setup, talking about, like, the differences of Bootstrap and Tailwind, and kind of covering some of the things that, you can get to by reading a lot of documentation, but just to really help introduce the concept and what it is. Like, the point we're at now is obviously the part that's fairly straightforward, which is applying the individual styles to the elements, which you just saw how we do here, right? Like, it's pretty simple and straightforward. Like, if you don't know exactly which utility classes you need, it's just referring back to the documentation and back and forth. So, I'm pretty happy with what we covered so far because, the piece that's left is just essentially repeating what we just did.
I think it would be.
Everywhere.
It is kind of fun. It is kind of fun rooting out those styles and.
Oh yeah, actually, like the design process is a ton of fun, and so like some of that I've done on my stream actually, with implementing the light theme, for example. Right, that was a lot of the same process of just like figuring out like which styles would be good to use, and working on the layout, working on like some of the previous features. So I'd be happy to pick it back up. As well. But, my main point was that with all of that introductory stuff done, was there anything that you wanted to go through or see before you hopped off?
Oh, good question. It was definitely pretty cool seeing, how everything's squashed at the bottom after you turned off Bootstrap.
Yeah. I use Flexbox a lot, so all those Flexbox styles just disappeared.
And it will be pretty cool to see once you start getting some more of those, migrated over to Tailwind. But yeah, I'm not sure. I guess you were talking about that generated CSS file that Tailwind is going to generate a CSS file for you.
Yeah, sure. You want to see what that? Okay, so in order for it to actually build the bundle, I have to run the like build command. So this is something that is really being controlled by Webpack. And Webpack is sort of our interface to Post CSS for this project because we're using Webpack. So by running my build commands, again through what we already actually covered a little bit of, if I go back down here, which is the Vue CLI service, like the Vue CLI service is what I'm using. And it kind of is an interface on top of Vue's custom Webpack configuration. And so By running build prod, for example, we will get an asset which will spit out a CSS file. So I can show you that. So when, I keep trying to switch to my editor, but it's right here. So npm run build prod will generate all of our assets in the dist directory. Oh no. Sorry about that, Rusty. I need to figure out how to turn that off. Nightbot just wants to... Okay, it only timed you off for 5 seconds. That's good. I don't know how to turn that off. You're welcome to whisper me a link, and then I can post it. But, yeah, for some reason, that's like one of the default settings of Nightbot. Okay, so the asset's built, and as you can see here, it generated app.sha.css or app.hash.css. So this is the file. Oh, command click, huh? Nice. Oh god. So look at this. Boom. These are all Tailwind styles. So this is that file that gets generated. And it's massive because we're not purging things that we aren't using at the moment.
Ah, okay.
Right? So that purge is a configuration piece that we didn't do yet, but that purging is what would go through and say, hey, like the 99% of these styles that aren't being used, like don't bundle those in the final file. But I mean, the good thing is, even if we did need most of these, which we wouldn't, but even if we did, because of how static assets work, after you visit this page one time, this entire file is cached, and then you don't have to worry about re-downloading it to your browser until I push a new update.
So like once every 5 days then, huh?
Yeah, something like that. And even that is not a big deal because the way that Octo is built. Also, I just posted the link that Rusty was trying to post. So apparently this podcast goes into... The message was deleted, so I can't see it. But I think he said the podcast goes into using Tailwind more. Oh, no, he said it in the whisper. He said it's a podcast with Adam Wathan. They go pretty in-depth out creating V2, etc. Okay, so
I think it's
about Tailwind.
Adam Wathan.
Wathan?
I think Wathan.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I think
you're
so.
Probably right. I don't know. I don't recognize the name. So, but that's the link though. I went ahead and shared it in chat. So, back to what I was saying though. The way Octo is built is because it's an offline first application. You're actually never, after you visit this app the first time, it will never try to fetch an asset synchronously. So whether there's an update for a CSS file or the app itself or anything, it will always happen in the background because the service worker strategy that I'm using is a cache first strategy, meaning the first thing the app does when you try to go to my domain, when you go to octo.app, is the app pulls that file out of the cache and loads it. Then in the background, it tries to fetch an update. And so because of it being an offline first app, it will always instantly load, whether you're online or offline. It will never try to fetch the file from the actual server first. It will always load it from your local machine first. So it doesn't really matter how large it is at that point after the first page visit, which, that's a lot more in line with what you would expect out of a native app. With native apps, you install them, and then occasionally there's an update that has to happen, right? And sometimes, if they do it well, those updates happen in the background, and you don't even notice them. But after that first initial install, whether you're online or offline, all you have to do is open the app. And that's how offline first web apps work too. Like, they're slightly different, but it's the same principle.
Yeah, so what's kind of, I guess, before we sign off here, just kind of tell me about the rest of your process. It'll be you'll go through and start assimilating Tailwind.
Yeah, it's going to be quite the process. I mean, as you can see, like even in just like a single component, there's going through figuring out the differences between all of these Bootstrap classes, converting them, trying to get it as close to what it looks like currently as possible, right? Like I really don't want the UI to change drastically, at least not as part of this migration. I like consistency, and so the goal is to make it look as similar to the current version, like as possible. So I'll be going through. I'll be slowly like removing styles and really dissecting these styles actually. So it's like an element like this, for example. If I go into the context, what I can do is I can inspect it, and I can see what styles get applied by doing this. Whoa, that's doing something really strange right now. It's not resizing automatically. But anywho, I can go in here and I can inspect something such as form group, right? If I want to know what styles are applied by form group, all I have to do is inspect the element and see, okay, the only thing that a form group does is a margin bottom of 1 rem. Okay, the way that I would replace that with Tailwind is I would get rid of form group and I would say MB4. That's 1 rem. Same exact style, right? So nothing changes. And that's what I'd be doing. I'd be going in the UI, inspecting the element, dissecting each class to figure out what style it applies, and then going from there.
I wonder if there's like a command line tool that
There
you could
is,
use.
actually. So,
oh yeah, to swap some stuff out automatically.
Yep. So I used one on the other project I was working on. There's two real ones that I found. Actually, one of them is just based on the other one, so they're actually the same tool. It's just the one that's actively maintained is actually built in PHP. It was built in order to convert Bootstrap to Tailwind in a PHP project. And actually, I think it was built for Laravel, I'm assuming, because it was also built to handle Vue. And so that's absolutely one approach I could take is I could go through the effort of installing that util and trying to do the transition. The one that I used was built with npm. It was built with JavaScript, and so it was essentially a fork of the PHP version in JavaScript, so that I can install it with npm and then just run it. In order to do the PHP one, I would have to get a PHP dev environment set up on my machine, right? Which I don't have at the moment because I haven't touched PHP in years. So that's absolutely something worth looking into and trying out. But what I ran into with the NPM version was inconsistencies, right? So at the very least, it might be a good starting ground to like try to run it and see like what it produces. But it's probably going to involve plenty of like hand tailoring anyway. So it's not a bad idea to do that. Like it would definitely save. I imagine it would save some time depending on how up to date it is, like how well maintained it is. Because the problem I had with the npm version was that it was not well maintained, and the version of Bootstrap I was using was newer than what it supported. And the version of Tailwind I was using was newer than what it supported. And so it ended up missing a lot of Bootstrap styles and generating Tailwind styles that didn't actually like exist.
Ah, I see.
Or if I don't know if they didn't exist or if they were just incorrect, but yeah. So, but that was my like first idea was to search for a util, and it kind of worked. And I would be down to give it a shot here. So, depending on whether or not we streamed this again or I streamed this again, I would be absolutely fine with going that route, trying it out, and see how it goes.
Yeah, it would definitely
hold my breath.
It'd definitely be interesting to see what it generates.
Yeah. The other issue I had with that was that it tried to reformat my Vue components, like changed spacing and all kinds of other stuff too, which was really strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, really, that's it though, right? Like it's just replacing those CSS classes with the new Tailwind classes, and then the other piece that would that would be slightly different than that is any of the components where I have custom CSS like this, I'd want to figure out how to replace that with utility classes rather than having to write custom CSS like I've done here. But yeah, I mean, digging in, reading more documentation, and doing a lot more of what we did today, really.
Nice. Well, so far, pretty easy change. I mean, you got a lot of
Yeah,
busy work to do, but
for sure. Not too bad. Well, I mean, if you're good, I think that this will be a good time to call it.
yeah, it was fun. I look forward to doing another one.
Yeah, I would definitely be down for that. This was a blast. As usual, I don't know when I'll be available again, but we could obviously talk more offline about that.
Sounds
Um,
good.
but yeah, thanks for coming on.
I'm glad Rusty got out from underneath the auto mod there. He's
Yeah.
have a nice night.
I'll have to figure that one out. That's happened in the past and I just forgot about it cuz it's been a while. Um but yeah, thank you to everyone else that was watching. Thanks Rusty for hanging out again. It's been a little bit. I'm going to share here oh, I guess the only social I have is my Twitter at the moment, but feel free to connect with me if you haven't. Um, Feel free to follow if you'd like to see future updates here. And otherwise, the VOD will be available, and I'll probably be uploading it to YouTube as well. So thank you, everyone else, and have a great evening.